as you start building street performance, you need to start paying attention to the spark plug, because they can cause massive engine damage if you're not paying attention to the signs or putting in the proper plug. So in today's video, we're going to be going over spark plugs and what you need to know about it. Now, there is a razor's edge here we're going to try to ride, because look, if I go too long, this is going to sound like an engineering lecture, and it's going to be boring, and it's going to feel like homework, and you're going to want to carve the eyes out of your head because it's such a dry video. On the other side of the coin, if I oversimplify everything, you don't really learn much. So I spent a whole bunch of time trying to compile the information I think you actually need to know as a street builder and put it into one video. This way you can go through it. Yes, there's going to be a bunch of technicalities, and I'm going to oversimplify things, and people could beat me to death in the comment section with, oh, well, technically, well, that's not important. What we're trying to do is get you up to speed so you have a good idea of what you're looking at when it comes to spark plugs and how to match the right spark plug to the right engine. All right, so let's start with the anatomy with the spark plug. First off, we got the terminal. Then you got the ceramic insulator. Then you got the ceramic around the electrode. The ground strap right here, or the ground insulator. The spark plug as a whole, this is what it is. This is your metal shell, your threads, and then your insulator around the electrode. Your ignition nose. All right, so what does the spark plug actually do? What it does is it sits inside of your cylinder, and your coil is going to build up juice. And then when the engine tells it, hey, send that juice to the spark plug, that juice is going to go through the spark plug wire. It's going to go into the spark plug. And once it reaches enough amperage to where it ionizes the space in between the two electrodes, a spark jumps across there and it creates an ignition kernel. And that little fire kernel spreads across the cylinder, igniting all the air and fuel. Well, igniting all the air and fuel, creating pressurized gas, pushing down on the piston. Rinse, wash, repeat. So, what is the difference between a hot and cold spark plug? This is where a lot of confusion comes in, because there's a hot and cold spark, and there's a hot and cold spark plug. So, what we're looking at here is the actual spark plug. The best way I heard it explained, now this isn't correct, again, this is one of those technicalities, but the best way I heard it explained is think of the spark plug as like a glow plug on a diesel. It's going to have heat on there, right? And what you're determining with a hot and cold spark plug is how much heat is actually going to be on there. So essentially what you're looking at here is a cold plug has a bunch of surface area to transfer that heat into the head, keeping this area right here a little bit colder. A hot plug has very little surface area, allowing this area right here to get much hotter. The advantage of this is, let's pretend you have a low compression engine, or you're always at low RPMs, or you're always putting around town, or is on and off driving. This hot plug will prevent this from getting fouled out, causing malfunctions. Next obvious question is, why not just run the hottest plug possible? Well, eventually once you get so hot, it's going to do what I like to call dieseling, or you could run into pre-ignition or detonation. Those are all different things, but they pretty much have a feedback loop, so once you got one, the other two come into play and they start building on each other. So you don't want to run too hot of a plug, otherwise you can get pre-ignition, ultimately again leading to detonation, and you know what, now you got a whole bunch of problems. Now you're causing serious engine damage. When a spark plug causes damage to an engine, this is typically where it happens. With pre-ignition, leading to detonation, knocking, now it's not good. And the fact of the matter is, a hotter spark plug does not give you any more horsepower or any more miles to the gallon. Now that's assuming that both plugs are running how they're supposed to. If one's running a little bit hotter, you're not gaining that stuff. Now the hotter plug can keep it from following up. And if that plug were to follow up, yes, you would go down in miles per gallon, but by itself, there's no advantage to it. The only purpose is to keep it from following out. Now, why not, or why do performance engines run a colder plug? Generally speaking, as your engine builds more and more temperature, more and more heat, as it gets more and more performance, you're going to have so much heat inside the combustion chamber. If you ran a hotter plug, well, now you have to run a less timing on it. You're not going to be able to run as much compression with that particular fuel you're trying to run. So usually, you know, there's exceptions always, but usually your standard is, as your performance goes up, as you throw a boost on it, as RPMs go up, as you put more load on the engine, you go with a colder and colder plug. So why not run the coldest plug possible? Well, because obviously it can foul out and you could have plug problems. So there is a balance there, what's going on here. A colder plug does not make more horsepower, even though you typically see them in performance engines. What are the heat numbers? This is something you need to be aware of. Basically, when it comes to spark plug heat numbers, they are not interchangeable. They all have their own codes of what's going on there. So make sure you use a conversion chart, whether you're going like a Bosch or an NGK or something like that, because if I run this number on a Bosch, that's not going to translate over to an NGK. But it might. Who knows? You got to run a conversion chart to make sure that it does. All right, so detonation versus pre-ignition. Detonation, what's going to happen is you're going to have a hot spot on the engine, whether that's the spark plug or a hot spot on the exhaust valve or a hot spot on the piston. And that's going to be hot enough where it's going to touch off the fuel. So the spark's firing, it's got a little fireball going here, then it's detonating over here and detonating over here, and all those slam together, and yeah, you got problems now. Pre-ignition just means that the fuel is touching off before the spark plug is ready. So it could be because the spark plug's too hot or there's a hot spot on the engine, but it's burning and it's going off before it happens. Now, like I said, these run into a feedback loop, so they start building on each other. So typically people use these terms interchangeably, but they are describing different things. So what we got here on detonation, this is how it normally should work. Your spark plug fires. It builds a fireball. As the piston comes up, that's ideally when you're getting to your maximum pressure, and then that fireball is pushing the piston back down. Detonation, in this particular case, is detonating off the valve, the piston, and the spark plugs all going up at once, so all these come together, boom, makes a massive pressure wave, causing damage to pistons, heads, spark plugs, not good at all. Pre-ignition, this is your normal cycle. It just means before the spark plug fires at the optimal time, when maybe it's 25 degrees before top dead center, something like that, it sets off and it starts trying to push the piston back down as the piston is trying to go up. Again, like I said, all those usually feed back on each other, so you'll start off with pre-detonation or pre-ignition, then you get into detonation, and then knock, and next thing you know, you have a hole through your piston. Not ideal, but they are different terms. All right, so why does a plug fire before top dead center? Fuel takes a long time to burn. So as the piston's going up, it's going up, it's going up, you set off the spark, so then it starts actually building meaningful pressure by the time it gets to the top, so then it pushes back down violently, creating horsepower. Now, there's an exception to that, nitromethane. That actually burns really slow, so you throw a whole bunch more timing on it, and then as the RPMs increase, you pull back the timing. With gasoline, it usually works in the opposite direction. We'll say we're idling at like 10 degrees before top dead center, right? We start accelerating, well, that gas still takes time to burn, and because now the piston's moving faster, we have to put more and more timing on it, so the fireball is ready by the time the piston hits top dead center and goes back down. Again, nitromethane is the exception because it burns really slow, but as the boost and stuff comes on, it starts accelerating in its burn rate. So then you're pulling off timing with nitro, you're adding timing with gasoline. All right, spark plug gap. So this is something right here. Typically, your gap is going to be between 0.28 and 0.60 thousandths. The larger the gap, the longer it delays the spark and allows the spark to build. So we're going to just use these two numbers. At 28 thousandths, I'm going to make up hypothetical numbers here. We're going to say it takes like 10,000 volts to ionize the space in between the electrode and shoot a spark across. Well, if I jack that up to 50,000 or 60 thousandths, we're going to pretend now it takes 40,000 volts. So that it's going to have more time to build and it's going to take longer to ionize that space. And then the spark's going to jump, so it's going to have a hotter spark and you have a larger flame kernel because there's more space in there to have a fire. So typically what you're seeing when you increase the gap, the spark gets hotter. So why not just run a huge gap? Well, you know what? A large gap has a large mixing channel like in between it, and you're going to get a very hot spark. Unfortunately, you're going to run into limitations. Eventually, you're going to hit a point where your ignition can't generate enough juice to be able to ionize that space in between there and jump the gap, and then you're going to get misfires. The larger the gap you have, the more voltage it's going to require to set that bad boy off. And if you go with too large of a gap, well, now you're going to have misfires. Plugs can fail, especially when you get into higher RPMs, and it's going to be hitting faster because the faster it hits, the shorter amount of time the coil has to build up power. Especially like on the old V8s with the rotary caps, that's one coil having to jump on each one. So you're going to have to keep a little bit tighter of a gap, or you're going to have to run a much bigger coil to be able to generate enough juice to jump that gap. Boost changes everything. Typically what they call it, boost, they call it blowing out the spark. That's not actually what's happening. What's going on here is with a boosted engine, for reasons I can't explain, when you get that air-fuel ratio under that much pressure, it's really hard to ionize that space in between it. I don't know why. I can't explain it. That's beyond my understanding, but that does in fact happen. So because it's harder to ionize that space in between it, with a boosted engine, if you have too big of a gap, they call it blowing out the flame, and then the spark don't hit, and it doesn't fire. So under normal operating circumstances, like just cruising on the street, it's just fine. But when the boost comes on, well, now the spark isn't going off. It's misfiring. So what you're going to do is you're going to back the gap down. So for example, we're going to say that with this particular engine, before I threw on the blower, it had a 45 thousandths gap, runs great. With the blower at idle and putting around and no boost, it runs great at 45 thousandths, but when I start getting on the boost, well, now it misfires. So what I have to do is I have to close that gap to 30 thousandths, giving it a shorter distance, requiring a lower voltage to be able to jump that gap. So that's what's going on with boost. It is harder to set off the spark, or it's harder to ionize that space in between the spark plug when you're running boost. All right, so what do we got here? With a blower, you're trying to accomplish two goals here, and that is running a colder heat range plug, because you're going to have such high cylinder temperatures. If you run a hot plug in there, you're going to run into detonation. You're just going to create too much heat. The fuel's going to pre-ignite, and that's going to create hot spots. Now you're going to get detonation. That's going to feed back, and then it's going to start going off earlier. Next thing you know, you got a hole through your piston. Or your rings come together and they pop off the top of the piston. Or you burn out a ring, or you burn through a cylinder head, or you melt off a spark plug. So you got to put a colder plug in there. Well, now you also need to run a smaller gap because, well, it takes less voltage to jump that. And you don't want to, what we're going to call, blow out the spark. So both these problems need to be addressed with boost. You need to run a colder plug and a smaller gap. All right, spark plug materials matter, but not like how you would think. I ran into this trap too myself. I'm like, oh, well, if I spend more on a spark plug, I'm obviously going to get more horsepower. This spark plug costs like 10 times more than the one that I just took out of there, so I should get 10 times more horsepower. Well, it doesn't work like that. So with spark plug materials, so your typical is nickel and copper. This works great. It works well. It has a short service life. However, for hot rodding, street use and stuff like that, you're going to be changing your plugs pretty frequently. So it doesn't really matter. The service life is irrelevant. Platinum, you get a longer service life. Double platinum, again, it's even more iridium. That allows for even a finer piece right there, a finer electrode. Plus, you're going to get a longer service life. So what you're getting with these other materials are increased service life, not more horsepower. And I didn't understand that. Now, there is obviously cheap of the cheap, and the spark plug just doesn't work properly. So there is still like a bargain basement prices that you don't want to go into. But for hot rodding, what we're going to be doing, yes, a standard plug will work just fine because we're going to change them out long enough to where we're not worried about a 100,000 mile service life. When somebody designing, I don't know, one of those Cadillacs where you have to remove like the whole tire upper half of the engine. I don't know if Cadillac's the right example, but the point is, when you basically have to tear the engine down to bare heads to change the spark plugs, you want a plug that's going to last a while. You want a plug that's going to last like 100,000 miles. So service life really matters, so they'll switch to these other materials just because they last longer. We're going to be throwing away our plugs constantly. Service life is irrelevant, so a standard plug will work just fine for us. So no, copper by itself doesn't make more power. It's just hot rodders typically use that type of plug because they're throwing them away and breaking them all the time anyway. All right, so what does the R mean on the box? Well, it doesn't mean race. And you know what? For you old carburetor guys that are running like points and stuff like that, this part's really irrelevant. But when you're talking about like ECUs, sensors, radios, other electronics, spark plugs are really noisy electronically. So this R is there. That means this spark plug is made basically for a modern vehicle. With ECUs, it brings that spark plug noise down. This way your computers and sensors and all that good stuff can function just fine. Carburetor guys, that doesn't really matter. You don't need to have the R on the box. Anybody running ECUs, sensors, radios, stuff like that, probably should get that type of plug. All right, now we have projected electrodes. So this is for specific engines. I just stay away from these because, yeah, I don't want to put in the wrong one and have my piston meet the spark plug because that's one hell of an expensive introduction. This is what your standard looking like. The projected ones, it brings it down in there. Like, from what I understand, again, this is one of those things where I just don't really understand what's going on here, but I do at the same time. It pushes the spark down more in the middle. This way the spark comes out. The Coyotes, they actually went with something a little bit weirder than that. They had this like cone on top of it. So when the spark detonates the gas, it shoots flames in multiple directions, giving it a better burn. This is like some sort of precursor to that. Got really popular for a while. I've seen a couple of Ford trucks where they're like, man, I swear like that freaking long. Anyway, these are the different ones. Myself, I stick with standard. That's probably what you're going to want to do unless you really know what you're looking at. And the engine design also matters. If you're running high compression, well, you don't want the piston to meet the spark plug. All right, spark plug reading. Now, we've all seen these diagrams in the Chilton books, and for whatever reason, those diagrams are in black and white, so they really don't tell you much. Typically, what you're looking at, normal, lean, rich. The best way I had it described to me, to actual usable knowledge I could use back in the day, is your spark plug should look like a cooked marshmallow. If it doesn't, something's wrong. And that's what we're looking at here. Like, so let's pretend you do a pass and you pull up your data log and it pulled all the timing out. And you're like, why the hell did it pull the timing out? You go and you pull your plugs and try to find which one's wrong. Which one looks like one of these right here? Then we know, all right, that cylinder has a problem. What exact problem is going on here? So that's what we're looking at here. Is the plug normal or is there something wrong with the engine? Typically, when we pull that plug, we already know something's wrong. We're trying to determine the cylinder and then trying to look at the plug, get a good idea of what's going on there. Now, performance plug reading, they're going to read the ground strap, the heat marks, all that stuff, the electrode all together. I mean, I'm just going to level with you. I'm going to push back on this. I think that, yes, it's a great data point. It truly, truly is. But getting your air-fuel ratio, all that other information on there, is this really that usable? Well, there's a bunch of people that argue yes. I believe they argue yes because they're trying to keep the traditional plug reading alive. Because when you're talking about carbureted engines, that did matter. How much did it matter? I grew up in carbureted engines, building performance. I never chopped apart a plug and read it. If I pulled the plug out, I was looking for something to be wrong. Always, I'm tuning at the carburetor. I'm getting my feel there. Yeah, pulling it out and looking at it like, okay, this cylinder is running rich. Why is this cylinder running rich? Oh, I ground off a cam lobe or something like that. I've never been able to specifically tune my air-fuel ratio by trying to read a plug. And it got harder as modern gas and modern fuel injection happened. It's still doable. You can do it. There are people that have plenty of YouTube videos teaching you how to do it. I'm not spending that much time on it. I'm going to look at my ECU. I'm going to put a scope on it. I'm going to be like, oh, the air-fuel ratio is great. We're good. Oh, the air-fuel ratio is not good. So I'm going to increase the injector length or the injector pulse. That's just my opinion on it. If you want to get wrapped up in trying to read your spark plug to that depth, go ahead. There's people that do it successfully. I'm not one of those people. Again, that's something I'm going to push back on. I think there's better ways to set your air-fuel ratio than chopping up spark plugs and trying to guess. Plus, if you're idling, well, that's going to screw it up. And is this really necessary in fuel-injected vehicles? Probably not. Carburetors, yeah, it still could be useful, but even then, how useful is it truly? All right. So everything on one slide. What we're looking at here is hotter plugs mean more heat. Think of it like a glow plug. Again, that's not accurate, but that's the best way to visualize it. Cooler plugs transfer heat faster. Bigger gaps give a larger spark channel, and it makes the spark delay until you can get more voltage in there, so it has more voltage jumping across that gap, ultimately giving you a hotter spark. Smaller gap, easier to burn under high compression or boost, stuff like that. You want to run a smaller gap if you're running boost or something where there's a whole bunch of compression. Platinum, iridium, all those things, they give you a longer service life. They do not actually give you more horsepower. Yes, obviously, if your standard plug burns out and the iridium one's still going, you're going to get more horsepower there. But that's about it. Boost, high cylinder pressure, boost, high cylinder pressures, yes, you're going to have more of a thermal load. It's going to be hard to fire. You're going to run a smaller gap, and you're going to be running a colder plug. Big takeaway here, there's no best spark plug. The best spark plug is the spark plug that is best matched to your particular performance application or what you are trying to do. Anyways, appreciate you guys watching the video. I hope you found it a little bit of educational, maybe even just a little bit of entertaining. If you'd like to help support the channel, go down in the description and click on that Amazon affiliate link. Even if you don't buy what that link is for, just do it in the Amazon shop and you were literally already going to do anyway. I'll kick back for it because you came there off my channel. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.